here, they're not close by to us, and we've had a few smoky days, but probably not as bad as some of the pictures I've seen of like New York, Philly, or Chicago.
Yeah.
But we've had a lot of rain the last few weeks, so hopefully that'll help out here.
Yeah. Isn't like Vancouver getting a lot of fires out west? Western Canada.
Yeah, British Columbia and Vancouver Island. Yeah, they're getting hit pretty hard.
Yeah. A lot of trees to burn.
Yes.
Okay, well, folks, it's 9:01. I think we'll get started with the meeting. I'm not sure everybody will be with us, so I want to welcome everyone to the July special meeting of the panel. Normally, when we have our panel meetings, they are set up in a webinar format where people who are observing the meeting to make a comment have to enter a chat function or raise their hand. This meeting was set up in a way that all people watching the meeting can actually participate in the meeting. I would ask you, if you're a member of the audience, not to participate until we ask for public comment, which we will at the end of each agenda item. So with that, I would like to start off with roll call. I am Jay Brown here. David Mintz. David.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. Linda Laird.
Yep, I'm here.
Sandy Stillwell.
I saw her.
Yeah, well, I know she was here. She said hi to everybody when she got on. Bruce McDonald.
Sorry, it's Sandy. I was having a hard time unmuting myself.
Okay. Okay, Bruce McDonald.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, Ken Gill.
Here.
Tony Lappy, I know, was not going to be able to be here today. John Jensen.
Yeah, here, Jay.
Ann Brady.
Good morning.
Hi, Ann. Marguerite Maville. Marguerite, are you around? Okay, and lastly, Bob Walter. Bob, are you with us this morning?
Good morning.
Hi, Bob.
Yeah. Morning, Bob.
Okay, the purpose of the meeting today, we want to review what happened at the county meeting Thursday night, get people's impressions of that, and then discuss retaining an attorney and what entity will be retaining the attorney, discuss methods of fundraising to pay the attorney fees, and to discuss our overall next steps between now and our next panel meeting. And then also Bob Walter has raised a question as to whether or not we should post some information that the county has put out, and we want to discuss whether or not we ought to be posting that information, which we'll do at the end of the agenda today. So with that, David, you are our head of governmental affairs and have been, the key person on this whole South Seas matter. Do you want to start off and give us your impressions of what happened at the county meeting?
My impressions? Yeah, I think I can do that. I'll do it. I'll try to do it quickly. I think it was a somewhat productive. I would say it was a productive meeting. As people know, originally it was going to be scheduled by the county attorney's office as a public hearing where the county would present the proposed amendments, and then people would have 3 minutes to comment as if it was a public hearing down in Fort Myers. And Commissioner Ruane, working with county staff, changed the format of the meeting and turned it into basically a panel discussion. And it was set up in the front where various stakeholders who have been outspoken about the various issues and the controversy had an opportunity to speak for a longer period of time to explain the position of their positions. We, as the panel, had the opportunity to present our position, which was reflected in our principles, which we drafted and which has been endorsed by organizations throughout Captiva and Sanibel. And basically, I think what we basically did is explain our position. We were very clear in that we told the county they were wrong to amend our plan and our code without consulting with the panel. We told them that there was no reason to raise our building heights to 3 stories above base flood elevation. And I'm talking about building heights outside the gate of South Seas. And we asked them to basically rescind that proposed amendment and let us keep what we've had, since nobody asked for the change and since it's been working well for since 2012. And we explained to the county, who was sitting there at the desk with us, basically, that the exemption for South Seas for 3 hotel units per acre, which applies to everybody else on Captiva, should not be changed. And also the building heights, which on Captiva are 28 feet above base flood elevation, that should not be changed for new construction at South Seas or anywhere else on Captiva. What came out at the meeting, and I think it was probably the most productive element of the meeting, was that South Seas was represented by Greg Spencer, the CEO of Timbers. What he was arguing when presenting, and he presented a PowerPoint presentation, is that under existing codes, South Seas would not be able to build back what they have. And his contention was that you have a lot of non-conforming buildings on South Seas, and that meaning they were built prior to the current Captiva codes. And that if they were destroyed by a natural disaster such as a hurricane, they could not, excuse me, they could not be built back in a way that would make them resilient. In other words, you couldn't build them back, but increase the base flood elevation so they would be safe from storm surge. And there was basically a confusion between what the build back provisions were and what provisions existed for new construction. And by the end of the meeting, it became clear that the county's position that people should build back what they have, and they should be able to build it back in a way that incorporates base flood elevation or 100-year storm regulations, or whatever jurisdiction has resiliency regulations that you have to incorporate if you're building again to meet code. You should be able to build back what you have while incorporating that. And it became clear that that was the intent of the county's build back provisions. I think in the course of the meeting, there was some people thought that there was some ambiguity, that there was some confusion on those build back provisions. So what resulted from the meeting was that Commissioner Ruane had requested the county staff, attorneys who were sitting at the table, to take a look at the build back provisions and make sure that they would permit any non-conforming building or any building anywhere on Captiva to build back what they have, incorporating the new regulations for base flood or 100-year storm or wave attenuation or whatever it is. And I think coming out of that meeting, there was consensus that everyone on Captiva and everyone in the county, excuse me, wanted to have clarity on the build back provisions. And basically by dealing with it that way, we removed it off the table. In other words, there was a lot of discussion from South Seas, both at the meeting and with their associations on South Seas. And South Seas was presenting a PowerPoint, which basically claimed that if you build back under the new build back, which on the new regulations, you would be prohibited from building up and that you would lose living space at the top. And I think what became clear at that meeting is that's just not the case. And so by removing that issue from the table, we hopefully we remove the confusion, building back what you have and building new structures, and removing that issue from a very separate issue, which is the issue of density. And during the course of the meeting, there was really no discussion of building new buildings that had nothing to do with build back. We made it clear that we believe we should be 28 feet above base flood elevation, which is what we have. And there's no discussion of density. I mean, I directly asked South Seas whether or not they are prepared to live under their density limitations of 247 units per acre on South Seas. And at this point, there was no answer to that question. And there was to be frank, there was an avoidance of dealing with the density issue. And I think at that point, when it became clear that South Seas did not want to engage in that discussion, police said they could have plans at this point with respect to density or even building the new construction. Commissioner, I think Commissioner Ruane at that point just thought that the best thing we could do at that meeting was to get the issue of build back off the table. And so I think by the August 2nd meeting, that build back issue should be gone. And everybody should recognize that they could build back what they had, plus incorporating the new resiliency measures. And therefore, by August 2nd, hopefully, we can deal directly with the density and new building heights for new buildings, not build back, in a more direct way. And I think that's my hope. Our position has been stated very clearly, which is that we don't think that South Seas should have greater density than anybody else on Captiva when it comes to hotel rooms. And I think that's the position of virtually all the organizations and individuals on Captiva and Sanibel at this point. I think with respect to new buildings that have nothing to do with build back, nothing to do with hurricane, nothing to do with natural disaster, we have advocated that South Sea should their administrative interpretation should be upgraded and made compliant with the existing Captiva code, which would allow new buildings to be 28 feet above base flood elevation, meaning whatever your base flood elevation is, you get 2 living floors above that. And that was the discussion we had. Like
David,
I said,
can I ask a question here? I'm a little confused.
go ahead.
So when you're saying about able to build back, what you're saying is you just can go up to the new base flood elevation, but it's not that like on Sanibel, you can't build back everything if it's not compliant with the new building codes if you're over the 50% rule. So this is confusing me a little bit.
Okay, if you're under there's a separate provision of the Lee County Code, which deals directly with build back after a natural disaster. It really had very little to do with what was presented in these proposed amendments. And people got confused about what was being proposed in the amendments and what the build back provisions are. But we started to focus at the meeting about the build back provisions. And the build back provisions in the county are really divided into 2 sections. One section is those buildings that were destroyed more than 50% of the value of those structures. And those are the ones that failed the 50% rule. And then there are those buildings that were not destroyed up to 50%. In other words, they were damaged less than 50%. If you're damaged less than 50%, you can build back what you had and you don't have to meet the new regulation. If you damage more than 50% of the value of the structure, you can build back what you have, the same square footage, the same density, the same intensity of use. But you have to build back so that you meet current regulations, meaning base flood elevation, storm attenuation, whatever it is. And the intent of the county build back provisions is to allow you to do that. In other words, you can go higher because you have to incorporate greater base flood elevation below your first livable floor. And that's what we're saying, we support that. On South Seas and for example, at Sunset Captiva, there are buildings that are there, the condos on Sunset Captiva, that are higher than current code would allow you to build today. Okay. And what the build back provisions say is that if that was destroyed more than 50%, you could build that back to the same intensity, the same density, the same everything, but it could be built higher because we're going to now allow you to incorporate the new base flood elevation, whatever it is. And that's what we're basically saying. Where the provisions were confusing for some, and maybe unintentionally confusing, maybe, I don't know, but what was confusing to some is that it wasn't always clear whether or not you can go up higher. In other words, whether you get increased height. There were parts of the provision that made it very clear you get height. Other ones said you get exactly what you had, same square footage, et cetera, but the word height wasn't incorporated. So what Commissioner Ruane wanted the lawyers to do is to clarify and to amend whatever build back provisions there were to make it clear that if you have to go higher to incorporate more resiliency measures that are required by the various jurisdictions, that the build back provisions in the Lee County Code would allow you to do that. That may be different than Sanibel. Sanibel may have an upper cap on in some areas in Sanibel. I don't know the answer to that. It was suggested the other day, Linda, that may be true, but that is not true in Lee County, and it's not true on Captiva. So if, for example, Sunset Captiva had 50% damage and they had to build back, but the new base flood elevation went from 15 feet to 20 feet, they would be able to add that 5 feet and go that 5 feet higher to get what they had before. You're muted, Linda.
Thank you, I understand that. That's good. So if they could go up 5 feet and the whole building sort of just goes up 5 feet.
Right.
But that you also were saying, quote, resiliency measures, and I wasn't sure what that meant. So for example, I've heard that South Seas says elevated parking so they can protect their vehicles is a resiliency measure, which, okay.
Yeah, if I said resiliency measure, what I was referring to is not what people would like to do, but what the various federal, state, and local jurisdictions are requiring you to do in order to.
Resiliency.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, but David, I suppose you had parking underneath the building, and then you had 2 living floors above the building, and that total height was higher than what is in our codes now. Would you be able to build back and save your parking, even though to be at whatever the base flood elevation is, you wouldn't be able to retain your parking? Is there a possibility of something like that happening?
No, I think what the build back provisions of the county is basically saying is there will be regulations that will establish where your first livable floor can be set.
Yes.
So that first livable floor in some places could be 10 feet, in some places it could be 18.5 feet. I think South Seas suggested that at the north side where their hotel units are, the base flood elevation is now up to 18.5 feet.
Right.
Okay, so you would, and if they had 2 floors, on the ground prior to the hurricane, so to say they just use that as an example, you could now go put those two same floors. You could build those two same floors, but they would start at 18 and a half
Right.
feet of ground. And that's what the build back provision would allow.
Right, but what if, I don't know if there are any examples of this, but would there be any circumstances where the base flood elevation would not permit parking underneath the buildings?
I have not
In
seen,
other words, there might be a situation where you have a base flood elevation that's, say, 5 feet above ground.
if
Yeah.
if you have base flood elevation of 5 feet and you're on Captiva, for example, outside the gate, you could build 28 feet above that 5 feet.
Right,
If you decided you have trucks that you wanted to, that you needed 10 feet to protect, let's just use that as an example. And you wanted 10 feet under your first livable floor, but you only have a base flood elevation of 5 feet. If you wanted that 10 feet, you would have to take the 5 feet off 5 feet of your livable space.
right, okay. So there could potentially be circumstances where you would, unless you, what if you had parking underneath before?
I think it's
I
based
don't
on,
know if we addressed that or thought of that.
no, it's not a question of what you had under there before, because you could have, I mean, technically, you're not supposed to build out underneath your first elevated, your
Right.
first floor. If you choose to have parking under there and you had a base flood elevation of 12 feet, you could put 12 feet of parking in
Right.
there. That's what it is. But if you had 5 feet base flood elevation, then you, unless you had a very small car, you're not going to put,
Yeah, right,
you're not going to put parking under there. And if you choose that you want to use 5 of your 28 feet to increase your parking, you're permitted to do that, but you would lose it off the top.
right.
What the regulations are basically saying is that you can build back what you have, exactly what you have, but if you're required by state, local, or federal jurisdictions to increase your, and I call them resiliency measures, but you're required to increase the first floor height to protect you from existing storm surge or whatever, then you can do that. But that's different than increasing your height because you desire to have a theater in the ground floor or parking in the ground floor or something like that.
Right, understand that, but suppose, I don't know if there is such an instance as this, but suppose that you did have a building where you did have, prior to the storm, parking underneath and 2 full living floors above. And now it comes to build back and you look at your base flood elevation. What we've been arguing for is you can have your 2 stories above base flood elevation, whatever that might be. But if that base flood elevation is only 5 feet, then you would be sacrificing the parking area underneath the structure if you'd had that before.
I now understand your question.
Yeah.
I don't know if there are any examples where people had prior existing buildings where the first floor was
Yeah.
high base flood elevation for whatever reasons, parking or whatnot. And the question is, if you can build back what you had before, and what you had before had space below your first floor, which was greater than base flood elevation.
Yes, right, that's the question.
I don't know if such an example exists, and and if it does, I don't know the answer to that question at this point.
David,
I mean, Jay, do you understand what I said?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay, yeah. John, go ahead.
now, didn't we talk about you could do add 4 feet to the base flood elevation?
Right. The county has proposed in their amended ordinance that if you live in a coastal zone, coastal A, I think in Z zone, you could on a discretionary basis increase your base flood elevation by up to 4 feet. And then you would be able to go up that same amount higher. So if your base flood elevation was 10 feet, you can choose to go 14 feet, and then you would still have 28 feet above that. So that is what the county's proposing. And we said in our principles that we would consider that as a possibility, as amending that to our Captiva code, so that people could do that. The problem with that, and why we need to discuss it in great detail with the county, is because their proposal didn't cover all of Captiva. It just covered a very small portion of Captiva that would be a benefit to only a very small portion of property owners. That was the first problem. And the other problem, as everybody knows, when the hurricane hit, a lot of the debris that was piled up on the streets was debris that was built out in the first floors below the first floor livable space. And people had built them out with bedrooms and bathrooms and things that they really shouldn't have, but they did. And a lot of the debris and a lot of the pickup was that. And so if we increase by up to 4 feet, what's permitted under base flood elevation, we don't want to be in a situation where you had base flood elevation of 6 feet and nobody built anything under there. And now you have 10 feet, and now all of a sudden you're going to put 2 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms down there. And then what you're doing is you're making your building less resilient rather than more resilient. And so those details have to be worked out. But in general principle, if we can increase our base flood in places where storm surge is a greater threat than your base flood elevation protects against. They're perfect examples. So on Sanibel, you had people with base flood elevation, say of 6 feet, but they got storm surge of 12 feet. And flood elevation didn't protect them. On Captiva, I think for the most part, nobody had storm surge greater than our base flood elevation. But in certain cases, that could happen in the future. And it may be worth looking at of increasing our permitted base flood elevation greater than what FEMA suggests, right? And so something we would look at. We just want to make sure it's done correctly. Everybody can benefit from it, and we don't create a bigger problem than we had by not doing it.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, David, do we need to come back to this before we close the meeting down and see if the panel wants to take a position on the 4 feet or take a position that you ought to be allowed to have parking underneath a building if your base flood elevation does not allow it?
No, I think in terms of the 4 feet, we've already taken a principle that we supported a principle that we would do that. And we would consider it at this point. The county's aware. I met with the county and I explained to them what the concerns are in terms of where it's only a very limited area on Captiva where it applies.
Yeah.
And et cetera. And they're reviewing that and they're looking at that and they'll come back with something on that. It's their proposal. And I think that we've taken the position that we would consider, I can tell you what exactly we said. We would consider offering property owners on Captiva the option to add up to 4 feet to their lawful base flood elevation. So we said we would consider it. We just need to get the details of what the county wants to really do there. And as far as the parking goes, I don't think we're in a position to do that at this point. I think the county is reviewing their build back provisions, which are quite extensive and quite comprehensive. And I think their intent is to allow people to build back what they have. I would let them work on this between now and August 2nd and take a look at it. And then we'll have an ability to comment on it when we have it in front of us. We don't have that at this point. So I would let, I think we're covered at this point and I'd let it go.
Okay. Yeah, I'll take that as you say for now. I'm not 100%, convinced. Well, I think we do need the 4 feet, to add it back. I think one can argue that does provide increased resilience. I also recognize that, that could have the unintended consequence of creating more ground level living spaces that are against code.
Right.
Do you know,
So-
Jay?
Yes.
This is Sandy,
Yes,
I-
Andy.
I agree with you about adding the 4 feet, but maybe in the language, the person would certify and promise that they're not going to build an underbuild. It's going to be used for a garage and storage only. And they further certify that, maybe that would pass the test.
Well,
Yeah.
Sandy, yeah, that suggestion has merit, but we already, all the codes say you can't use that for, living space
Right.
anyway.
But,
So,
I'm never gonna blow the whistle on my neighbors, but I'm gonna tell you all around,
Yeah.
and we saw it after.
but we
hurricane.
know everybody,
Yeah.
everybody who can builds out those lower areas in some
Yeah,
fashion. Right.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's the conundrum, and
Yeah.
the county is aware that, the county code enforcement is not particularly helpful when it comes to these issues. The county generally has said that unless we actually see people building it out, or unless the property owner gives us permission to look at their property, we really can't do much about that. And that makes it absolutely impossible to enforce. And so I think the county's aware of this problem, and I think they really didn't understand the complexity and the seriousness of it until they saw all the debris piled up after the last hurricane. And so I think this is an issue they are going to have to address. And I think when they develop their 4 feet proposal with a little more detail, I think we'll be able to intelligently comment on it at that point.
So you think they've learned something with respect to this build out because of all the debris and having to get rid of it, David?
Oh, yeah, I think, how could you miss it? When.
Well,
Yeah, I think what they've learned, I don't know, but I think they certainly are aware of it. And I think it's an issue that we as on Captiva have to deal with also. And I
Yeah.
think let's face the 4 additional feet above base flood elevation, even though we may not have needed it during Ian, clearly Sanibel needed it and or could have maybe used it. And it's something we have to seriously consider. We just want to make sure, as Jay said, that there aren't too many unintended consequences that result from it.
thank you.
Okay. David, do you have any other comments on the meeting?
Well, other than, I think, like I say, I think it was productive because it hopefully takes the issue that South Seas was articulating more than any other issue, was build back and basically advising their homeowners associations that they couldn't build back unless we changed the building heights and density requirements for Captiva. And I think what came out of that meeting is that the build back provisions are a separate discrete issue and that it's going to be addressed by the county. And so I think that's positive. And I think we have a meeting scheduled for August 2nd at 6 o'clock at Big Arts. I'm not quite sure what the format's going to be. Maybe it'll be the same, maybe it'll be slightly different, or maybe it'll be very different. That'll be decided, I guess, by the county between now and August 2nd. But I think it's important for people to come to that meeting if they can. I know it'll be Zoomed. They have.
Well, the meeting will be Zoomed at
I think it'll be live streamed at Big Arts. That's my understanding. I can't
Okay.
swear, but that's my understanding. I think that, but it's important for people to be there. And so I think it's a continuation of what happened on July 13th. But hopefully we'll be able to address the 2 issues that are most concerned to people on Captiva, which are density and building heights for new structures, not build back. And so I think to the extent that build back's off the table or will be off the table, I think that's a positive thing. And I think now we're going to have to address the issues where there's really a difference of opinion among some of the players here. Yeah.
David, have you had conversations that say that we're going to go now talk about these other issues? Or is this just your hope?
I think it's sort of I think it's halfway between conversation and hope. I think it was evident to everybody there that the elephant in the room, the two elephants in the room were density and building new buildings, and that there was not going to be consensus at that first meeting. But I think I thought it was sort of a distraction to go into build back, because I didn't think there was really an issue of build back. But now that we discussed it fully, and I think it's off the table, I don't think there's much else to talk about, Linda, other than density and new building heights at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, my impression is the principal timbers argument has been that we cannot build back what we had before, with changing flood elevation. That was their main problem that they were talking about all the time, is we can't build back what we had before. And I think my impression is, as a result of this first county meeting, I think there's unanimity and clarity that everybody should be able to build back what they had before, taking into account the new flood elevations. That if you had whatever you had before, you can build it back, and you can build it back so that it's above the new flood elevations, all your living space. So that South Sea should no longer have any issue with building back what it had before.
I think that's right.
So the issues that would remain then is if, somebody wants to have additional living stories or living floors beyond what they had prior to the hurricane, that's going to be an issue. And if they want to be able to have more units than what's in the land development code, that's an issue. So I think those are the two issues left. Can they build back with more living space than they had before, and can they build more units than what they had before?
Right, and on that, it's not even necessarily build back, because, for example, the 140 employee housing units were taken down prior to the hurricane. And so the question is, can they build new condominiums or new units there that are greater than anybody else on Captiva? That's the question.
Yeah.
And also, I don't know if it's even part of discussion or concern, but the size of the apartments of the employee housing, and then they were switching them over to condos and so on. I don't think that the amount of square footage had anything to do with it. It was just more the density. Is that correct?
That's correct, Sandy. Yeah, they can. Yeah, they've got the ability to build, I think it's 142 new units to replace the employee housing units they had, but there is no limitation upon what the square footage of those units could be.
Because I thought that was a good thing that we did years back, allowing them to do that, and we didn't object at all, to them switching that out. And so I just wanted to reiterate that I think that we've been very giving in that way in the past, that we didn't object to that.
Right.
I think you're right. I think a unit is a residential family unit, and that could have a 1 bedroom, that could be 2 bedrooms, that could be 3 bedrooms, as Sandy implies. And I think where the limitation on anybody would be, whether that be someone on Captiva Drive or someone building on South Seas, is the setback requirements, the height requirements, the open space requirements, the floor area ratio requirements, things that would limit how big you can be, but not because of the number of bedrooms or the size of the unit, but because you have to meet the standards with respect to setbacks, open space, and various other code provisions that protect your neighbors. And I think that's the limitation, but there would be no limitation in the code as I'm familiar with now, which would prevent you from going from a 1-bedroom employee housing unit to a 3-bedroom condo, so long as you don't interfere with some of those other requirements that would affect your neighbor.
Okay, does anybody else want to comment on the meeting from the panel? Anybody else in the panel want to make additional comments on the last Thursday's meeting? Okay, Ken, do we have any audience questions or comments that we should address?
Yes, there are a couple. First question was, what would happen if they seek a variance to include their parking?
Seek a variance from height.
I assume height, if they wish to increase their underbuilding elevation.
Well, I can speak, right now under the administrative interpretation, they have they have more restrictive height requirements than we do outside of the gate of Captiva. We amended our heights in 2012. The administrative interpretation has yet to do that. And so that's why we've always said that the administrative interpretation should be made compliant with the Captiva code that was amended in 2012 that allowed for resiliency and base flood elevation. But in answer to that very specific question, there are no variances for on Captiva for that would be permitted to raise your structure above what the code provides for, which is 28 feet above base flood elevation. There is no, if you're being governed by the Captiva code as it existed, there's no variance for height.
Okay, this is more of a statement than a question. I think the panel is clear on the matter that building back what you had before that met the building codes is the issue, not permission to finish ground levels that were not previously built to code.
It was hard to understand what that was.
I'm not, it's basically, I think it's just a statement. There's not a question. So we're not going to, you will not be allowed, if you had a ground level house, you will not be allowed to build it back if it is more than 50% destroyed. You will have to elevate.
That is correct. That is correct. That is true throughout the county.
Yes.
That's everywhere.
The next question is, so if a new standard of elevation is created by the build back code, excuse me, I need to mute some people. So if a new standard of elevation is created by the build back code, meaning base flood plus 4 feet plus 3 floors, then does it follow that they will feel that their new structures could conform to that versus the current 2-floor limits?
I don't understand that question.
Basically, if they have 3 floors now, with this new elevation, would they still get 3 floors?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if Bayside Villas or Tennis Villas or Land's End in the next hurricane, God forbid, was destroyed more than 50% damage, they could build back under the county's build back provisions what they had before, meaning the 3 floors or even the 4 floors in certain cases if they had a loft. And they would also be able to go up to whatever height the new FEMA or 100-year flood elevations would require. So the answer to that is yes.
That's all.
Okay. Next item that we wanted to discuss was legal representation. David, you've been in discussions with an attorney and with other community organizations that would be involved in retaining this attorney. You want to brief us on what our plans are for legal representation?
Sure. As we discussed at the last meeting, there are, as much as the panel may have preferred to hire an attorney as the panel, we are governed by the public meetings law and sunshine. And we're also been authorized by the county to make recommendations to the county with respect to land development code and plan issues. So obviously there were some legal concerns about whether or not anything we would do as a legal matter would be open to the public, and open to any adversary if we were involved in litigation. And there were some questions about whether we even can get into litigation directly with the county, given our relationship with the county. So in consultation with the law firm of Holland and Knight, we discussed the best way to structure, starting to pour rain heavy right here. Captiva. Yeah, anyway, so what happened here is that the CCA, could you, thank you, Ken. The CCA, the Captiva Civic Association has stepped up under this circumstance and has agreed and offered to be officially the client with respect to retaining the law firm of Holland and Knight. The CCA has a land use committee, a standing land use committee, and it's been agreed that the land use committee for this purpose, for this legal representation, would consist of a member of the Captiva Community Panel, a member of the SCCF, a member of Ding Darling Wildlife Society, a member of the Council of Associations at South Seas, which is, the association of all the homeowners associations and condo associations at South Seas, as well as the CCA. So the coalition that was created before is being maintained. These 5 organizations are going to be working together, and they will constitute the land use committee of the CCA. They will make collective decisions and will direct the law firm as a body, and there will be a single person designated by that group to deal directly with the law firm as we move forward. So the law firm will be directed by that committee, which consists of all the organizations I just mentioned, or representatives from those organizations. And those representatives will share with each of those organizations those matters that can be shared that doesn't interfere with a lawyer-attorney privilege, lawyer-client privilege. And so as a representative on that committee, for the panel, anything that doesn't implicate the privilege, I will return to the panel and explain what we're doing legally. But things that are privileged and are lawyer-client confidential, we won't do that. So we basically have a coalition of all the key stakeholders, organization-wise, which will be working directly with this law firm, which was what we hope to do. In terms of what the law firm is going to do, Jay had asked basically what the deliverables would be, and they're going to assist this group in analyzing the impact of the proposed changes on development in Captiva, analyze the compliance of the proposed changes with existing regulations, including the Growth Management Act. They will review and draft alternative code and plan provisions that we could present to the county. They will communicate the position of this group to county representatives, including elected officials as appropriate. They may intervene in the county's plan and code amendment process. That's the process that's taking place between now and September 5th, or maybe after September 5th. If in fact there's some clear violations of the law, which there may be. They will appear on behalf of the client at public hearings, workshops, or other events to discuss the potential changes. And if this thing gets approved on September 5th, as it stands without changes, unfortunately, if that happens, they will possibly initiate or join litigation to protect the existing height and density regulations that now exist on Captiva. So that covers pretty much the whole waterfront in terms of what we may need. The CCA has volunteered with other representatives of these organizations to create a fundraising effort for the legal representation. We have had, and that's going to be set up over the next couple of days. And we will put the word out that we're seeking funds for legal representation. They're going to work out among themselves a process by which, if we collect more funds than we need, how that money gets returned in some sort of pro rata fashion, but that hasn't been worked out yet. But at this point, SCCF has already donated $10,000 to the legal fund. The panel, as you know from our last meeting, has donated $10,000 to the legal fund. And the CCA, the Captiva Civic Association, just voted a couple of days ago to donate $10,000 to the legal fund. So before we even put word out, and I know there are a lot of people that have sent emails saying they'd like to donate, but before we even put the word out, we have $30,000 in the legal fund for this legal work. Hopefully this gets resolved before September 5th, but we don't know. So I think we're trying to make sure we're prepared for the worst and hope for the best.
Okay, do we need any kind of motions or anything, David, to follow through on what you want to do regarding legal representation?
I don't think so. I think we already did that at the last meeting.
Yes, I think so too.
Yeah.
Okay, does anybody have any questions first from the panel on legal representation? Ken, is there any questions from the audience on legal representation?
No.
Okay. All right. David, are there any potential next steps that we ought to be discussing beyond what we've discussed here today?
I think what we've been asking people to do, and I know it's on the Sanibel agenda this afternoon, is we've been asking various organizations around our area, Captiva Sanibel, to endorse the panel's principles, which they've been doing that.
Yes.
We've heard no objections. We need people to be prepared to come to the August 2nd meeting, either in person or by Zoom. Before August 2nd, we will have a better sense of what the format of that meeting is going to be and what the agenda is for that meeting. If the agenda is density and new construction, then we want people to weigh in on that. Obviously, they've been doing that. We have a very strong and unified voice. If it's not going to be that, and for some reason they're going to push that can down the road, and we get to September 5th and there's no full discussion of that, we're going to have to develop a strategy to make sure that those issues are addressed directly. I'm hopeful that they will be addressed, but we don't want to go to the September 5th meeting without without it fully recognized that they're changing our code and our plan without listening to us, meaning Sanibel and Captiva, and that issue doesn't get discussed. That's just not going to be acceptable. So we'll have a better sense of that in the next week or so, and we will make sure that the information gets out, Jay.
Okay. All right. I think the last matter I wanted to address today, the county has recently put out information relative to the to their proposed amendments. And Bob Walter, I know you would like to see the panel put those on our website and to, I guess, broadly distribute them. And David, you feel there's a lot of erroneous information in the county communication there. And you're saying, why should we put out something that, has a lot of misinformation in it and is basically opposed to the principles that we've all, adopted, as to how we want this to proceed to go forward. So,
I don't think Bob is here anymore, unless I'm wrong.
Oh, Bob is here.
okay,
Oh,
Bob's
there you
here.
are.
Bob, you want to speak to this, please?
Yeah. First of all, I think there's one thing we can all agree on. There's a lot of questions that need answered.
Right.
And the county has presented this history of the amendments and frequently asked questions on the county's building code and everything. They've done what I think is a very good job of stating the position and the reason and the question and the answer. And they went over this in the CCA meeting. They've made it very evident to everybody this link exists if you want to get more information. And I think it's prudent that we do the right thing and we put that position and allow people to make their own decisions. And I don't think there's a fine line between I don't agree with it and it's inaccurate. I mean, this is the county saying what the county's code is and explaining what it is and how it is. And it seems to be some people on this call, on this panel, don't agree with it, so therefore it's erroneous. But I think for the panel not to post this, I think is wrong. And it's a link. It's just a link to the county's website.
Right. David, you want to speak to this or?
Yeah, sure. This was created by the county and put on their website, I think, shortly after the county commissioners were inundated with emails and letters and telephone calls opposing what the county had proposed in terms of changing the Captiva code without any consultation with us. And I generally have no objection to referring people to what the county puts out. But in my view, this is filled with inaccuracies, and I feel it would be irresponsible actually for the panel to be posting this at this point. And I'll just go through it quickly. It gives the history of the proposed amendments. And then it says, for example, on May 10th, the Executive Regulatory Oversight Committee reviewed the proposed amendments to the Land Development Code and recommended their adoption. They said that at the county meeting, and we got emails from members of the EROC, the Executive Regulatory Oversight Committee, which consists of business representatives from Lee County, who review the impact of code changes. And they emailed us and told us that they never discussed it at their meeting, and they certainly didn't recommend approval of them. And so we checked with the county on that. And the fact of the matter is they never brought it to the EROC, and the EROC never discussed it, and they never recommended it. And so for us to put out on our website that the EROC reviewed the proposed amendments and recommended their adoption is just incorrect, and we should not be doing that. It also says that on June 7th, a request was to set the ordinance for a public hearing was presented to the Board of County Commissioners. That did not happen on June 7th. That happened on June 6th. It said that this matter has been postponed. The Land Development Code amendment's been postponed until September 6th. That's not true. It's been postponed till September 5th. So September 6th is wrong. We're telling people that the hearing is on September 6th, when in fact it's September 5th. And it says then on June 21st at 9:30, the county will consider transmittal of the plan amendments to the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity. That's not true. That did not happen. When they postponed the June 20th, when they changed that date, they also postponed the plan amendment being transmitted to the state. So that information is absolutely incorrect. So just in the first page of this history is 1, 2, 3, 4 errors with respect to dates and what took place, and with respect to what EROC considered and recommended. So right there, that's enough for, at least for me, not to put it on. But then there we get to to some of the real serious problems. So it says in one part that the proposed ordinance is not changing any of the existing development parameters for South Seas. Now, we know that it's not changing the administrative interpretation, but it's certainly changing the potential development parameters for South Seas, because it's removing South Seas from our 3 hotel units per acre from our land development code, and it's removing South Seas from any building heights that we have in the Captiva code for new construction. So it's definitely changing the parameters. And then it goes on to say the exemption that they're creating for South Seas would permit South Seas to be treated as other hotels in the rest of Lee County. That's absolutely not true. because they're not being treated the same as other hotels in Lee County, because Twin Waters and Sandy's hotels are still 3 units, 3 hotel units per acre. And so there are Captiva hotels that are not being treated the same way. So you're not treating South Seas as other hotels, because other hotels, the ones closest to South Seas, are not being treated in the same way. And then it goes on to say that in regards to this exemption for South Seas, that the county had the direction, it was their direction to expand basically density for South Seas. And if we want to expand it for other hotels, those other hotels can propose it. But the fact is, if you look at the direction that the county staff was given with respect to any of these amendments, there was no direction to increase density. So the claim that they were directed by the Board of County Commissioners to allow for the increase in density is also incorrect. And then there's a section on our building heights, the building heights that would be permitted under the amendments of that are being proposed by the county. And it says, with the revised exemption, meaning the exemption for South Seas, the height is capped at 45 feet, up from the existing 35 feet or 42 feet, which is in the administrative interpretation. But it's not capped at 45 feet. It's capped at 45 feet above base flood elevation. That's the first thing. And the second thing is they can request up to 75 feet above base flood elevation, and there's no dispute about that. So when they say the height is capped at 45 feet, it's just wrong. It's 45 feet above base flood, and they can request up to 75 feet above base flood. And then it goes on to say that with the exemption, density is capped at 3 units per acre, the same as existing in the Captiva code. But that's not true. They are removing the cap of 3 hotel units per acre for South Seas. It's not the same as existing. It's very different. It's actually completely changing it. And then it says that since the ordinance does not change South Seas development rights under the administrative interpretation, there are no impacts. Yes, they're not changing the administrative interpretation yet, but they are changing what South Seas can ask for if they amend their administrative interpretation, which are new heights and new density. Then it goes on to say, information on height restrictions. Many residents are being told that the height restrictions are being eliminated. Some believe that buildings will be allowed to be built over 75 feet. This is not the case. It is absolutely the case. It is absolutely indisputable that South Seas, under certain circumstances, can request 75 feet above base flood elevation if the county amendments are passed. So that's just wrong. And then it goes on to what the Captiva building heights are. And it says Captiva building heights are measured at grade of the lot being built upon or mean sea level, meaning 35 feet or 42 feet. There is nothing in this thing that explains that we have 28 feet above base flood elevation. And the reason is because when they wrote this, they didn't understand that our Captiva building heights was 28 feet above base flood elevation. They just didn't know at that time because there was a typo in what they were looking at that they created that outlined our existing height regulations. So there is no mention here in this whole document that we're 28 feet above base flood elevation and we incorporate base flood elevation. So, and then it goes on to say is that the draft ordinance does not change the maximum building height limitations under the LEED plan. Yes, it doesn't change the fact that you can ask for 75 feet under the LEED plan, but what it changes is what South Seas can ask for under the LEED plan. And that's where it's misleading. And it says, otherwise, the draft ordinance provides that except for South Seas, the height of a building or structure may not exceed 35 feet. That's wrong. The height of our building does exceed 35 feet because we go 28 feet above base flood elevation. They just get that completely wrong. And then the last line in this thing says, anyone claiming that the proposed draft ordinance will result in 75 feet buildings is misinformed. That's just not true. No one is misinformed. They can request up to 75 feet above base flood elevation, and the county doesn't dispute that. So whoever drafted this, when it was drafted, just got a lot of it wrong. And I understand that this is on the website. I have requested the county to take a look at this because I saw it for the first time last week. And I said, there's just filled with misleading things and things that are just dead incorrect. And would they take a look at it? And they said they would do so. So that's where we are. So at this point, to put this on our website, leaving aside the fact that it's arguing for something that we're against as a panel and what we proposed, but given the fact that it had so many mistakes in it, I think that it just doesn't make sense at this for us to put it up there. And if we did put it up there, I think we need to have an explanation of why so much of it is incorrect and inaccurate. So that's my view of it. Bob, I understand your position. I understand why South Seas thinks this is helps them. I get it completely, but it's just the wrong thing to do.
Hey, Dave, a quick question. You said something during that whole presentation. I wrote myself a note. But you mentioned Tween Waters is under the 3 units per acre.
3 hotel units per acre.
How many hotel rooms do they have?
I couldn't tell you how many hotel rooms they have right now, but I can tell you that they were built prior to the code, just like so many of the buildings on South Seas were built prior to the code. And just like at Jensen's Marina, they were built prior to the code. And if they were building, for example, new buildings like South Seas was doing, where the employee housing would be, they would be governed by 28 feet above base flood elevation, and they would be governed by 3 units per acre. So for example, if all the historic buildings on Jensen's Marina were taken down, where they have them in since before the code was created, and I think
I'm not talking historic buildings, and I was talking Tween Waters, so if we could stay on that subject. There are 137 rooms, and they're just about 9 acres. So they far exceed the 3 per acre, regardless of when they were built. I just want to make that very clear.
well, yeah, but see, that's the problem, Bob. If you're basically saying
What's the problem? I state a fact?
no, the problem is position. Everything that Captiva has learned and worked through and developed over the last 10, 20 years for the island, to keep the vision of the island, and there were buildings that were built and hotel units that were built and buildings that were built higher than the vision and the code now permits. You basically want to go back in history and say, we should be able to do what was built prior to any new codes or provisions that the community created over the last 20 years. And that's just.
David, I'm just replying to your comment. I thought I heard you say clearly that why would South Seas have special rights on density when no one else has those special rights? And I'm just pointing out, 1, no one's asked for any special rights, but 2, that Tween Waters clearly far exceeds the 3 units per acre. That's all I'm bringing up.
But Bob, the reason for that, we're making a distinction between when we passed all of those, we passed new height and density regulations back in 2012. And we said going forward, and we wrote that into our plan, that was all done at 2012. The community, rethought and said, this is from 2012, this is how we want to go forward. And that's what we wrote into the land development code. And that's what, Lee County approved. So obviously there were people building things prior to 2012 that, are grandfathered. And so the fact that, things were built out of code before we created those codes, you can't ask those people to go down and tear down everything and now become, in compliance with our current code. So everything that was done before 2012 is grandfathered. The question is, what are the rights of people, who want to build after 2012 going forward?
Jay, hasn't the 3 units per acre been in effect a lot longer than 2012?
Yes.
Yeah, but whatever it was, Twin Waters, I'm confident,
Yeah,
it
They
was
were-
built before that.
yeah, it's
The
like Twin,
3.3.
yeah, like Twin Palms was built, yeah, way before that. you know.
Right.
So,
Yeah, we've learned some things since 1980 and since 1960 and since 1930. And we've amended our code and our plan over time to protect this island. And, it's like saying to Sanibel, listen, Lee County had wanted 90,000 people on Sanibel back in, before they had the Sanibel plan, and we should allow them to do that. That's not how it works. I mean, when this community came together long before 2012 in terms of density, and 2012 in terms of increasing the heights to include base flood elevation, and we developed a vision, and that vision is in the Captiva plan, and that vision is reflected in our codes, and that protects this island. And, we've learned a lot. And all we're asking is, going forward, people comply and abide by and respect the decisions of this Captiva community over time, and not to say we want to have what was built 30 years ago before those codes were created. It doesn't make any sense. And I understand the argument. I understand why South Seas wants to make it, but it's just not acceptable.
Okay, well, on the matter of posting the county information, how about we post it, but David, alongside it,
Jay,
you-
don't make him write it up.
oh, okay, all right, well, I was
Okay,
just,
he's got enough work. If
oh, no,
County-
believe me, I understand that, and I was gritting my teeth as I started to say it, but I don't know, there might be value in people understanding, how misleading
No,
information is in there.
no,
Okay,
no. No.
so Linda, I
the
think
county-
you're saying just don't post it, right?
Don't post it. If the county comes up with something that is revised, that is accurate, we'll be glad to post.
Okay, is there I'm gonna call for a vote on this. Is there any other discussion before we call a vote on whether or not to post this county information?
I move we do not post the county information.
Okay. Can I have a second?
Second,
Hey,
Okay.
Jake,
Yes,
do we know when the county would come back with a?
I don't think we do. They just said they would take a look at it.
Yeah, I mean, if they probably won't be in the next week,
Yeah.
So,
Okay, we have a second. Any further discussion? If you want to not post it, raise your hand, say no.
No.
If you want to post it, raise your hand and say yes.
Yes.
Okay, I think the majority is for not posting it. So we will not post it.
Yeah, I make a notation. They can
Yes.
still go to the county website and they can pull it up. If somebody's interested, they can pull it up on their own and read it. It's just by us putting it on the website, it makes it seem like we're endorsing it or we're saying that it's accurate when. we
Yeah,
know-
yeah, unless we were to write something, a rebuttal of it, and Linda raises a good point. It'd probably take David, 12 hours of his time to write a rebuttal, and he's doing so much already.
Well, I think the
Ask
other
him
thing,
to-
I don't think we need to publicly on our website basically criticize what the county has done. I don't think it serves any purpose. I think we've told the county it's wrong and they should review it. And I think when they do, we can choose what we want to do at that point. But I don't think we should be posting on our website where our credibility is at stake, things that are clearly incorrect. So just Iraq alone, it's horrible that they would say they recommended it. Yeah, just on that alone.
I have one other comment, and that was, I was speaking with the ladies, the attorneys from Retzel and Andrus.
Yes,
And they were, I believe it's the Roberts family that they work for regarding this. And they were saying that they might try to come up with some language that would clear up some of the inconsistencies, et cetera. And was David aware of that? And are you working with them at all so that it might be
Yes.
easier if they had, your point by point so they can correct it.
Roselle and Andrus, who represent the Roberts, the RLR, they were on the panel too. They are taking a look at the build back provisions, and to the extent that those build back provisions aren't clear, which is what South Seas was claiming, even though the county actually thought they were pretty clear. They're going to suggest proposals that to clarify any of that. That was Kevin's request. My understanding is that the county, separately from Roselle and Andrus, is also going to be looking at the same build back provisions. And I've been in constant communication with Roselle and Andrus on this, Sandy, and I'm going to make sure that the panel's position on this is also known. And yes, I think the hope is that we have the revisions and the clarity by August 2nd meeting, that the county, Roselle Law Firm, and us, the panel, are all have consensus on and are on board and put this issue to bed.
Okay, I think we've completed our agenda. The next meeting will be our regularly scheduled meeting, which will follow a few days after the next county meeting. So I don't anticipate any need to have a special meeting between now and our next regular meeting, but we can always do that if the situation changes and we need to get back together quickly, keeping in mind that we need to provide 7 days notice to a public meeting. So before I adjourn this meeting, I want to ask if any other panel members have anything they want to say.
Yeah, I think, Jay, I don't know if we need a meeting, but I think Ken Goodham and the panel will definitely get out a email blast to our 1,000 email recipients about the format and any new information we have on the August 2nd meeting.
Yes,
So when is our next meeting?
it will be the second Tuesday of August, which I think is probably August 9th, something like that. Ken, do you have that date?
So do we think that's close enough to the August 2nd meeting?
It's August 8th.
It's a week later,
6 days later.
6 days later, sorry. Is that close enough? Anybody else?
Well,
Everybody else is okay with that. Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine. Then my final comment, though, is, again, I think we should all be thanking David for the
absolutely.
amount of work he's doing. I think everyone on is so appreciative, David. And you're being a great hero for Captiva. Thank you.
Yeah,
I know.
David doesn't like to get compliments, but he certainly deserves them. David, your knowledge and commitment to this is just remarkable. And I know your panel appreciates it, and I believe your community does also. Are there any other public comments before we adjourn?
No.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. We will adjourn the meeting, and we will all get back together then on August 8th. If something comes up that requires an emergency meeting, we will call it. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thank
Jay.
you, Jay.
Thanks, everyone.